And he called me up shortly thereafter and said, you guys have done so much work on this over the last year. How quickly could you do a compilation of that work, update it with the latest data, and let's get it into the hands of as many people as we can? We'll just, we'll put it on paperback. It won't make that much money, but the point of it is to get this information into as many people's hands as possible.
And so, how do you pull your information? So it seems, the basic narrative out there is obviously you're going to die if you don't have a mask on, and not only that, you're a murderer if you're not willing to wear a mask.
Yeah.
And so the operating assumption of our culture, whether anyone's looked at any or not, is that all the data favors a mask. All the data is how dangerous you are leaving your home. Because as you point out, I remember a year ago it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That's not even discussing.
Right.
And the moving goalpost constantly is a frustration.
Right.
So where did you go for some data? And obviously you can go to your book and people can discover the data.
But where did it come from originally?
Yeah.
Originally, we had to rely on other nations. Okay. Our CDC was either terrible at this, way behind, or malevolent. And you can all decide for yourselves.
So should we trust the experts?
It depends which experts. What helped us from the beginning is that we didn't have to. I think that we went into this thinking, is this going to be? And I mentioned it in my talk in the stage, the global warming connection to this. So is this going to be like a proxy fight for global warming? And what was surprising from the very beginning is that there were esteemed scholars from elite institutions around the world who all along have been like, this is bunk, okay? Like a Nobel Prize winning physician who defied our CDC and others in running, I think it was Argentina's hydroxychloroquine program. Dr. Martin Koldorf at Harvard University, he designed the VAERS vaccine incident website for CDC. He's been a staunch opponent of lockdowns from the very beginning. These second opinions have all been, it's a little bit like, let's make this very practical.
What's amazing to me, as you mentioned these names, these, they're nowhere to be found.
Yes.
They're nowhere to be found.
And these are not, again, from Podunk Junior Colleges. Yeah. Multiple scientists. Before Scott, and I love Scott Atlas, but Scott obviously is a political figure from the Hoover Institution. But there are non-politicized scientists at Stanford University. Dr. John Ioannidis, for example. He looked at the Diamond cruise ship, the Diamond Princess cruise ship last year at this, and tried to extrapolate, because he does world population health for Stanford. And everything he wrote about the IFR and CFRs of this virus from what we got from the Diamond cruise ship has turned out to be correct. These people were just all ignored unless they fit into one narrative. So let me make it really practical for the audience.
Sorry to interrupt you, but one thing that's even fascinating with that, going on social media, last week there's just tons of things saying Stanford denies any. So even if you appeal to the Stanford scientists,
yes.
Stanford denies.
Yes.
And so the plastering marketing campaign from Twitter to Facebook is.
And that's exactly what it is a marketing campaign. Look at it this way: if someone came to you, if your doctor gave you a very dire diagnosis and said, in order to treat this, we're going to have to remove a very sensitive part of your body. You have testicular cancer. We have to remove a lump from a very sensitive part of your body to treat this. That may be true. But before you decide to let them operate on that part of your body, what are you probably going to go and try to find first?
At least one more opinion.
At least one more opinion before you open yourself up to that level of scrutiny, right? That's exactly what didn't happen here. And I think that's where we got a lot of our early confidence, because if it was just political from the beginning, we would have tiptoed a lot easier. And we would have let more of the domestic data play itself out a little longer, because in the end, lives are more important than a political narrative. But when we saw from the beginning how many scholars around the world and in our own country, the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, for example, has been highly critical of Boris Johnson for the last year. That's the #1 rated university in the world.
And if you see Boris Johnson publicly, it's acting as if he's just liberal as far as open everything up, let everybody die. And yet here he is locking things down, receiving criticism. So.
And that's what gave us, just as a couple of schmucks in Iowa, all right, hey, there's actually people that understand the professional lingo and things here. And then we started getting stratified data from other nations around the world. And then there was a letter that Senator Cruz sent after I brought a lot of this data to Ted Cruz. I was a strategist on his presidential campaign. And I said, hey, our CDC, we got to do something about this. And so Ted's office took our data and put a letter together to Robert Redfield, who was the head of the CDC last year. And that's when I think we started to begin to get some real answers from, you started seeing stratified data from our own CDC and things of that nature when we started to pressure them along those lines. But that begs an obvious question that every critical thinker listening to this should ask themselves. Why during at least the worst pandemic since the Hong Kong flu in 1969, probably the worst since the Spanish flu 100 years ago, and given all the technology we have to get all this data out there into the hands of the average person that didn't exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago, why did they have to be pushed and prodded to show you this data? All the answers to that question are bad.
Yeah, and the thing was interesting in your talk, you said two things I found pretty fascinating, I think, is absolutely right. One, you mentioned Sweden, their consistent secularism. So they're able to actually be, in a sense, more free in their pursuit of the data. And the other thing was kind of intertwined with that, and it made me think of Francis Schaeffer, How Then Shall You Live. He does these videos, and I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but he makes the comment that what's really needed is the outworking of humanism. You don't need a conspiracy here. What you need is a consistent outworking of humanism. And I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but there was something close along those lines, like this is the application of their, basically the hermeneutic. And so, would you mind addressing that?
You nailed it. Ultimately, whether the virus, we just got unlucky one day that a bat that nests 900 miles away from Wuhan, China, or 900 kilometers away from Wuhan, China, just happened to end up in a wet market gnawing on a pig with this virus, or it was engineered and altered some way in a lab. Whichever the true origins of this are, Bill Gates didn't have his world dominionist vaccination program. He had this set up for whether it was going to be COVID-19, COVID-38, the next rhinovirus, whatever. I think that's important to understand that this is a manifestation, a fulfillment of a belief system and a worldview. It says, when the time was right, Paul writes, God sent his son. Well, what does that mean when the time was right? Now, maybe one way that Paul is expressing this, look at human history at that time. All right, so most of the civilized world, for the first time since Babel, is under really one culture, custom, and language, the Greco-Roman culture. We have advancements in asphalt, paving of roads, seaways, things of that nature. For maybe the first time since humans are dispersed at Babel, it is possible to go to almost the entire civilized world with one singular message. And so maybe that's why the time was right? That's just not like a random statement Paul makes, but that God was literally, through his sovereignty, aligning history for when the moment was right for the Messiah to come. The enemy has counterfeit versions of the exact same thing. Yeah. When the time was right, when we were preconditioned, when we had spent a generation being indoctrinated out of critical thinking in government schools, paganized, etc., when we had become increasingly statist as a people, right? There can be an unharmonic convergence too, and I think that's what I was referring to.
Yeah, and if R.J. Rushdoony, he wrote a article called "The Society of Satan," and probably one of the most influential paragraphs on my thinking ever, because he just lays out that the unbeliever has the analog to whatever we have. They have an analog atonement. They have an analog sovereignty. Right. And once you realize that, this realm of neutrality is not really there, and you do have these antithetical systems of thought that, once the facts come in, even as a Christian, we kind of mock the idea of, don't let any, what are they, go unexploited. I'm totally blank on that.
The crisis, don't let a crisis go to waste?
Yeah, don't let a crisis go to waste. Even as a Christian, you want to, here's our opportunity.
Yes.
So I understand the basic desire of, here's our opportunity, let's take it. And they're just running to the hill.
Correct.
And even as you pointed out in your talk, and I think it's fascinating of how much came up with, and I was down in Los Angeles when the thing hit, and it was 2 weeks later, kind of like, it's a clean city. You know what I mean? And so it'll be curious because, what was it, 2 years ago, we had 12 years left until we were all going to die. And so the laying of the land seems to be that's the trajectory. Things are shut down. Here, look how nature's healing itself. You know what I mean? We're all returning back to
the virus.
Yes. Exactly. And humanity is the plague. Really, the real plague here is not COVID-19.
But to the spirit of the age, we are the plague.
Yeah.
To the demonic manifestation of the world system of the era that you live in, you are the plague.
And fascinating enough, within their system, we're just a byproduct of it. You know what I mean? So the subtle irony is they're actually giving us dominion over the world. And so it's actually Christianity that gives us the context, yes, we have dominion of the world, and yet their whole operating assumption is man-made global warming, man-made wade whatever it is. The subtle irony
I used to try to get global warming scientists on my local show when we were just in Des Moines, and I'd always ask them, are you a committed Darwinist? And apparently the memo got out. I got like 2 of them to come on, and they fell for this. And then I can never get anybody to do this again. Are you a committed Darwinist? And they would say, well, of course. I'm like, then if human beings are causing the Earth to inhospitably warm, why isn't that natural selection at work? Why hasn't natural selection determined that it's no longer right for the ecosystem for the species Homo sapien to be at the top of the food chain? And so it is adjusting conditions accordingly, and then it will be the salamander's time to rule the habitat for the next epoch.
Yeah.
Well, aren't you acting against your own stated belief system?
And even who we are in the system, we're really no different than a volcano. You know what I mean? And so when the volcano bursts and it gives out all of its CO2 and it warms the air and all that, like, we're really fundamentally no different. You know what I mean? Do we have meaning or do we not? Are we unique in the creation or are we not? Yeah.
Do we carry a distinctiveness or do we not? And what's funny is while claiming while the spirit of the age claims that we do not, as you pointed out, it often behaves in acknowledgement that we do.
Yeah. And that is the subtle irony is the whole global warming thing, the whole save humanity thing is in the pretext of kind of a Christian position. And so it is the sort of place where apologetically, from the gospel standpoint, we should be able to lean in. Like, we shouldn't shrink back and just be shrill and
Agreed.
scared, but just absolutely lean in. And so this whole pandemic, even as there are so many good things. Seriously, listen to his talk. Go get his book. I haven't read his book. I'm now going to have to read the book because given the talk, there are just so many things that were good. Like you were laying out, and I think you're reasonable because even sometimes I feel like conservatives in response to it, like almost like act like they don't care about humanity. We don't care.
That's why we need data.
Yeah, and you're.
That's why the question at the end I got about vaccinations. I urged the guy not to impose the same dogma because we oppose the notion of vaccine passports. Let's not reverse engineer bad data on vaccines that does not exist. See, this is the challenge we have as believers, is we understand that the enemy has, as you put it, an analog for everything that God ordains. But we aren't permitted the same tactics that he is in advancing his narrative into a propaganda. We have to do ours with integrity. We are commanded to use a level of tactical deployment that edifies our beliefs, doesn't undermine them. And that always means we're going to probably be a step behind. We're going to always give a benefit, like when there is a pandemic, we're always going to be a step behind. Let's make sure that this isn't the Walking Dead. It's not the bubonic plague. Before Christianity is not for reactionaries. And I think that's where we have to be very, very careful, especially the more the culture falls into political balkanization. We will be tempted to fall into which of my reactionary camps will you affirm now? And so we have to, in the world and not of it means that you can oppose the notion of vaccine passports and what they mean without being intellectually dishonest about what the vaccine data actually says.
Yeah.
If whoever has to lie to make their case probably has the crappier case.
Yeah. And if we're Christians and we're lying as part of our agenda, we've already lost.
There's a problem.
Yeah,
yes.
There's a problem. We've actually undermined our own kingdom. So
yes.
we can let Satan, the father of lies, try to advance through lies.
Yes.
And we are better off, like you're saying, taking our time, presenting our case, being faithful to the gospel. I don't want to keep you. I said I'm going to interview you for a few minutes, and I know some other people want to talk to you. But how can they learn a little bit more about who you are, what you're doing, and then from there, how to get your book if it's not banned at this point?
It is not. We've sold too many copies. Amazon can't ban it now. They're making too much money off the book, actually. So we put this thing out on paperback thinking, we'll make a bunch of money on this. Well, when you sell as many copies, you can make it up in volume. But you can get it in Amazon right now, and the beauty of it on paperback is that we never run out. You do a hardcover, and then there's printings and back orders, and this way we can keep fulfillment going constantly. We've had so many people order multiple copies of Faucian Bargain, send them to their pastors, family members, because we want to set the captives free with this book. But we also there's two goals of this book: setting the captives free, number one. Number two, flesh out the false objection. Who's a sheep and who's a wolf? Right? The sheep just doesn't know. the wolf doesn't want to know. So how do we find out whose motivations are righteous here? Put real data in front of them and you'll find out the answer. So you can get Fauci and Bargain at Amazon, and then just if you listen to podcasts like on iTunes and stuff, just search for our name, Steve Deace, Deace.
Okay, great. I actually first met Steve about a decade ago. I was preaching in Iowa. Some friends knew who Steve was. He was running a radio show in a mall.
Yeah.
In a mall in downtown.
Yes.
Downtown Des Moines.
Yeah.
And I like there were a couple other local radio shows that maybe at the time may have been like bigger locally that I was able to do. But without pumping you up here, I really thought from sitting down with you to the end of the interview, I was like Steve has to be one of the smartest people. Just the ability. So I sat down with Jen first, and we maybe talked for like 20 minutes, and then she may have spent like 2 minutes with you debriefing what our discussion was. And then I sit down, I was like, how does Steve know everything about me? It was like a 2-minute download that Jen gave you.
It helps to have almost a photographic memory. It makes people think you're smarter than you actually are.
And I just remember being like, how does this guy recall? It was a 2-minute download that he got, and ended up being a great interview. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I was able to get a little jab in on you because you said, you made a comment, you were able to get people to listen to you for 5 hours. I said, well, you were able to get people to listen to you for 3.
Yes.
And I remember you, I think it was Mark Jasinski, if you remember him. He was sitting in the booth with Rebecca, and Rebecca goes, "There's too much confidence in that room." And so my first couple of radio interviews, I was fairly confident along the way. But it was a great time. It was great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
You bet, man.
And, great talk.
Thank you.
Buy his book. Seriously, because we need better than just shrill responses and appearing to not like we care about our neighbor.
Amen.
And so we do love our neighbor. We don't want our neighbor to die. And like you're saying, we want real data and we want science. And
if the data showed that the masks work, I'd have stood in that room today and said, I know they suck, okay, but they're saving lives, all right? And I'm not saying we do it indefinitely, but they don't work, though. And so that's why now we're being asked to participate in a religious ritual.
Yeah.
But my first priority would be what you just said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, it is kind of a secular book at this point. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yep.
Fight, Laugh, Feast, network.com/live rally.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
You bet.
Take care.
You bet.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again.